USDA Hardiness Zone Maps probably don't mean what you think they do, and we need to talk about it. So if you're a gardener or pay attention to the climate at all, this is probably a thing you've seen before. This is the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Map, which tells you in general, at least it's intended to tell you, how likely your perennial plants are to survive the cold or survive the winter in a given location. Doesn't tell you about heat, doesn't tell you about a lot of other things, just how cold it gets. So if you go and you look at your plant label and it says on the label hardy to zone 6B, that should really survive up here in the northern Texas panhandle and through these green stripes because it can get down to -5 degrees Fahrenheit or so. But we need to talk about some of the limitations of this map because of how it's created. So I live right about there in Lubbock, Texas. So we're like a zone 7B, which means on an average year, we should get between 5 degrees and 10 degrees Fahrenheit during the winter. This map is built by taking a given location like Lubbock, Texas, and looking at it over a 30-year period. And for each of those years, looking at what the most extreme cold temperature is in that whole year, and then averaging all those 30 years together. So for example, for Lubbock, Texas, if on February 3rd or something we got down to -3 degrees Fahrenheit, which does happen, they would look at that and they would take the coldest temperature from all those other years and slap them together and come up with a 7B, which again means that our average annual coldest temperature is between 5 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and will range from a 6A up here in the Panhandle to maybe a 10B down in McAllen near the Mexican border. But what this doesn't tell you is actually a lot of stuff. It doesn't tell you when it gets that cold. It doesn't tell you for how long it's that cold. It doesn't tell you how frequently it gets that cold. So it may get -3 on February 3rd, and then it may hit -3 again in March once plants have started to come out of dormancy. And that's not great. So if we're using this as our only metric for whether a plant will survive in a given area, it can be good. It can be useful, but sometimes it's not. Looking around the country, we may get down to a zone 11A, 11B in southern Florida, which is 40, 45 degrees, really should never freeze, to Hawaii, which is even more warm. It's truly tropical, and in some cases, it's like a zone 13, which means it shouldn't ever get below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but you can get into 8B up in the mountains where it may get down to 15. And then there's Alaska, that may be a 1A, which is -60 degrees Fahrenheit. Where does that get fun? That feels like a fake temperature. If you have kept up with this at all, again, if you're a gardener, you may have realized or may have heard that in 2023, the most recent map published, it changed, right? A lot of these moved north, which in some ways should be setting off some alarm bells in your head. Just, it really should, because climate change is going to drive these maps to change over time. Now, a lot of people will point to the limitations that I pointed out earlier and say this is not a good indicator of climate change. And to a certain extent, that is true. It is not a great sole indicator of climate change. But when we see these marching progressively north and we see it changing, where places that were maybe a zone 5 before are now registering like a zone 6B or vice versa or something like that, it changes what we can plant, it changes what we can grow there, and it will drastically change the native distributions of plants in these areas. And I've heard people say, well, they can just draw the 30-year boundaries wherever they want to make it say what they want. Okay, yes, you can mess with data to make it say whatever you want. That is true. However, they have pretty strict rules about this. They're not trying to get you. They're trying to tell the truth about what our climate in the United States looks like. And you'll see these maps for other places. There's a European version, there's a Canadian version. I believe there's one in Mexico and different places around the world. So we can use USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Maps really well, really effectively. They are great tools in the toolbox. And again, while yes, this is not a sole indicator of climate change and not the only thing we should be looking at, it is a pretty effective addition of several brush strokes to what we should be looking at as a big picture of climate in our world. So to summarize, yes, these change. Yes, they're moving north. Yes, it's useful. No, it's not the best tool out there to figure out if your plant will survive. Maybe go talk to a local gardener or a master gardener or Google search what grows in my area. I don't know. Use this, use it well, but use other things too when you're trying to make your plant choices. All right, have a good day.